I shall laud you, Jehovah, my God, because in a fear-inspiring way, I am wonderfully made.
You're listening to The Critical Thought, where we challenge our listeners to use critical thinking when examining the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Hi, I'm Lady C, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Critical Thought. In this upcoming interview, I'll be talking with Joe Dyer, YouTuber over on 4747, and he's going to be sharing his experiences as a Jehovah's Witness elder. Thank you so much, Joe, for being on the program.
Well, thank you, and I first of all want to mention that I love your channel. You and JT are Hall of Famers in my book.
Oh, thank you. And you're a Hall of Famer in ours as well.
Well, thank you.
We're all working for the same cause, right?
Yes, indeed.
So let's just talk a little bit about your becoming one of Jehovah's Witnesses. If you can just briefly talk about that. And I know a lot of people probably have been to your channel and they've had a chance to, see a lot of your videos and everything. So kind of give us some new information if you can, or reference one of your videos that you already have out there. And I also will put a link to your channel in this particular video description.
Oh, great.
Okay.
Well, actually, I was raised in the Watchtower. At 3 years of age, the indoctrination started for me. My mom was actually Catholic, and she had me when she was 17, and she started studying Watchtower publications with the witnesses, her and her husband. So at 3 years of age, I started attending the Kingdom Hall. Now, I will tell you, I didn't do very well at the Kingdom Hall because it was hard. They had the 2-hour meetings, and of course the conventions were long days. And when I went to meetings, I will tell you, I usually got a beating, so that was part of the indoctrination.
Oh my God! Yeah, I remember those little kids getting beatings.
Yes, I'm telling you. So I expected that. But one of the things that happened when I was around, it was either 5 or 6, they made an announcement, and I actually never paid attention at the meetings. I was thinking about other things. You're a kid, right? Well, they made an announcement, and it was a disfellowshipping announcement. Now, I didn't know what that was, but we were sitting in the back, and it was very traumatic because when they made the announcement, the person that was disfellowshipped, it was an older lady, very nice lady. She started crying uncontrollably. And I didn't know what was going on. And of course, I didn't know what disfellowshipping was. So I asked my mom, because I was sitting next to my mom, and I said, what is happening? And she made the comment, we can't speak to her anymore. We can't talk to her anymore. She's disfellowshipped. So that was the first time I heard the word disfellowship, other than the individual announcing it. Now, I just assumed when you got disfellowshipped, that was it. You're done. Because she was crying uncontrollably. I didn't know anything about reinstatement. Now, I will tell you this. Our first congregation was the Minnequaw congregation. And looking back, because we had disfellowshippings every month, especially in the 70s, there were a lot of disfellowshippings. They should have actually called that congregation the Green Mile, because there were executions on a monthly basis.
Oh my God. And you know what? That would be very traumatic too. And I remember telling people about my experience. I'll just tell you really quick, is that when I was a little kid, we lived in Arizona, and like yourself, I didn't understand disfellowshipping, to the point where I thought they were just pulling names out of a hat and deciding who would be disfellowshipped that month, because that's how often we were getting those announcements made at our Kingdom Hall. And I would be sitting at the meeting just shaking like, they're going to call me next, I'm next. And I was just had a phobia about that.
Mhm.
You know, so I totally get what you're saying.
Well, it got to the point where when they said a certain brother was going to make an announcement, I would actually start shaking because it never made sense to me how people could be cut off.
Mm-hmm. So then tell me this. Okay, so now let's fast forward a bit. Now, you've given us your example of how it was that you came to be knowing about these disfellowshippings, you know, how you came to know about disfellowshippings. And now let's fast forward to a time when you're older now and you're getting ready to they're getting ready to use you in the congregation. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that then?
Actually, before that happened, I left at 18 or 19 years of age because my family was not the poster family of the Watchtower, very dysfunctional. My mom's husband, even though he was a witness, was a full-blown alcoholic, beat me, beat my mom. I left, and I moved to Kansas. Now, I had my own apartment. I was living the dream. I was getting friends. I wasn't getting Watchtower influence, and I was actually enjoying life. Had a nice job, and then a knock at the door. And of course, I'm the type of person, I struggle when it comes to telling people to leave. I'm a people pleaser, so I invited them in. Big mistake, because they talked me into a Bible study. Now, I studied, and by the way, I'm going to say publication study because it was more the publication. It was the Live Forever book came out. We were finishing the Truth book, but then we started the Live Forever book. But I was so concerned about disfellowshipping, and I also didn't believe that the Watchtower had a monopoly on salvation. And so we were out in service one day, and I asked the individual studying with me, because he was an elder, I said, you have to tell me before I proceed to the point of baptism, I need to know, what is disfellowshipping all about? I mean, it makes me nervous. Actually, it's traumatic. And in my perception, he flat out lied to me. This is what he told me. He said, you don't have to worry about disfellowshipping. Disfellowshipping is the last resort. And I said, well, give me an example. He said, the elders will work with anyone that commits a sin. And he gives me one example. He said, let's say a brother starts smoking. They will work with him. And the only time they will disfellowship a person, if that person tells the elders that he doesn't care what they say, he's going to continue to smoke. And in other words, he's rejecting everything they say. However, I later on became a ministerial servant, and then 3 years later I became an elder and realized that that was not the case.
Okay. So now, you want to get into that part of it, talk about that? Okay.
So one of the first things that I will mention, when I became an elder, because I didn't want to be a part of this judicial committee system, I went to the presiding overseer. I know now they call them coordinators. And I told him, I am not comfortable judging other people. And I was very fortunate because the first congregation I was appointed as an elder, it was a big elder body. And so he told me, he said, if you're not comfortable, when things come up, just let the other elders know you don't want to be a part of it. But I will tell you, there were men appointed around the same time I was appointed. I am not embellishing. They couldn't wait to be on judicial committees. I think there was some sort of a power trip with it. But I told them I wasn't comfortable. And for several years, I was not on committees. I liked public talks. I liked shepherding, but I was not a committee guy. I do not want to judge.
Yeah. So are you going to give us a classic example of one of the cases that you served on? Okay.
So I ended up moving to another congregation, and this congregation only had 4 elders. So I was the 5th elder, meaning I would have to be part of judicial committees. And what I'd like to do is just try to explain why I feel it's such a flawed system. First of all, the Watchtower would like to use James chapter 5. You may recall it says, if anyone is sick among you, go to the older men. And it actually says that they will pray and make the indisposed one well. Well, if you look at that passage, nowhere does it mention a judicial committee system, a judgment system. And I will tell you this, what I learned about judicial committees, they are not interventions. And the biggest problem with judicial committees that I find is that when a person becomes an elder, and most elders that are watching this can relate, you get a book, the Shepherd the Flock of God book. And I myself, when I got the book, I really didn't like reading it because about 70% of that book is very depressing. It deals with judicial committees. On top of that, every 3 years you get what they call an elder seminar, elder school. So that's all the training you get. In addition to that, many of the men that are appointed, and I've known a lot of appointed men that had problems when it even came to reading, comprehending. So what I'm going to do is do an actual case study. And this actually occurred. This was one of I was either on 12 or 13 judicial committees. 7 were disfellowshipped. And I tell people this, when you know how many committees you were on and how many people were disfellowshipped, you know the Watchtower messed you up. So I will tell you about the first case. Now, before I do, I want to share one thing with you. Before you even meet with the person, you have to go to a certain chapter in the Secret Elders book, Shepherd the Flock of God book. And it's chapter 7 under Judicial Hearing Procedure. Now, I will tell you this, most men do not even go and read that. Some men will read it but can't comprehend it. I'll give you an example. On this specific committee I'm going to mention, we had an elder that struggled with reading. In fact, I will never forget the day they let him conduct the Watchtower. And he was conducting the Watchtower, and he really hacked it up really bad. The Watchtower was talking about hyperboles. And one of the questions had that word in it, and he said hyperbole. And I'm thinking, okay, they should have never let him conduct the Watchtower. Well, the friends started saying the same word, hyperbole. So I finally raised my hand and mentioned it's actually hyperbole. Well, there was one more question, and like I said, he was really hacking up the Watchtower. The question was, how can we battle spiritual fatigue? Well, he said, how can we battle spiritual fatigue? And after I heard that, I'm thinking, here's an appointed man that is going to be used, that's going to be cut loose on people when it comes to judicial hearings. So I knew if he reads any of these instructions, he may not even comprehend what he's reading.
Right. Oh my God. Right.
So let's go to this case. It was a sister. Now, a little background information. The brother that she married came from a very prominent family. His dad was an elder at the time when they got married. His mother was a pioneer. His brother was a Bethel elder and a table head at Bethel. So he came from a prominent family. Well, he marries this woman, very attractive young lady. She's not a witness. And there's a judicial committee. Now, I wasn't at the congregation at the time, but he got reproved because there was some fornication before they got married. So can you see a little bit of the favoritism?
Nepotism.
Family.
Mm-hmm.
He got reproved. Now, I wasn't there, but that's what they told me. So she ended up, they were married for quite some time, but she ended up committing adultery. Now, she did the right thing according to Watchtower protocol. She went to the elders. She went to 2 elders, and her conscience was bothering her. So she went to the brothers and said that she had committed adultery with a workmate. Now, one of the things that she mentioned was the reason she did this was because her husband was not giving her physical, emotional, and intimate support. So she realized she made a mistake, but her husband was not there for her emotionally, physically, and even sexually. So she confessed to the elders. Now, what happens is the 2 men that usually meet with her, they usually are not supposed to be on the committee. But because we only had 5 elders and 2 men that were elders were related to her husband, could not be on the committee. So I was one of the elders. The chairman was, I would say, an alpha elder. He was a go for the jugular type guy when it came to judicial committees. He loved to disfellowship people, and this is my perception, okay? I'm just giving you my perception. And then the other person was the individual that had reading problems, comprehension problems. So I always tell people it's all about who you draw as elders. Now, I will tell you one more thing, and this is very important. Everybody already made their decision before we even met with her, and I'll tell you why. We met prior to meeting with her, and we went over instructions. Now, I'm going to be honest. I did not want to disfellowship anybody, so in my mind, I'm thinking I'm going to be an advocate. So I already made a decision. You see the flaws?
Right.
Now the other two men, we went over some instructions. So let me share the instructions. These were some things that they were concerned about, some points. Point number 1, is the individual truthful? When questioned, are his, or let's say her, answers forthright? Is he or she cooperative with the judicial committee? The judicial committee should be especially cautious if the individual has shown himself or herself to be guilty of hypocrisy, lying, or deliberate efforts to deceive. Now, when we met, one of the concerns was that the elder felt that she wasn't going to be truthful. And here's why a lot of people, and I've seen this in comments, that people that have been through judicial committees, they wonder why elders ask very personal questions. It's all because of this little bullet. Is the individual truthful? When questioned, are they forthright? So elders think this is a license to ask inappropriate questions, and I've seen it. Another point that I'll talk about before we talk about the committee was the point, tears do not necessarily indicate sincere repentance. Now, the chairman brought this up. Now, again, we have not met with her yet. And he said, the two brothers mentioned she was crying. And he said, when she comes in, if she's crying, let's not look at that as showing repentance. So we're already making up minds before she's even in the room. Now, here's another one that they brought to my attention. Does he or she accept responsibility for his or her error, or does he or she minimize or justify his or her bad course? And then lastly, does he or she recognize the fact that lesser sins led up to the wrongdoing, and is he or she determined to avoid these? So we reviewed these, and now she's invited in. Now I want to mention, I already made up my mind. I was not in a position to pull the trigger on anybody, and in my mind, I did not want to disfellowship, okay? You see the problem? We're already making up our minds. And of course, when they read these bullets, the other men had made comments about the fact that she was crying. Don't let that mislead you. And then the fact that they wanted to question her to see if she's going to be truthful. So she comes in, and of course, we always, we have the greetings, and then we say a prayer. And already she's tearing up. She was not ready for a judicial committee, and I could tell, it's very traumatic. She's scared. And so one of the first things that the chairman did was ask her to talk about what actually happened. And so she did. She was forthright. She mentioned that she did something wrong. She hurt Jehovah, her family, her husband. But she also mentioned she wanted to retain the congregation and her husband. So after that, the questions started to roll, and they weren't coming from me. They wanted to know specifics. Now, the problem with asking personal questions is not everybody is in a position to talk about those things. And I believe the one elder that could hardly read asked her if oral sex was involved. And I mean, I'm shocked. In fact, I mentioned to the other men while she was in the room, I said, is this necessary? And I just wanted to stand up for her. I wanted to be an advocate. And later on, I will tell you, when she left the room, the chairman told me that I was too emotional to be on judicial committees, which is fine. But yes, it's so sad that they have to dive into personal issues, personal things that are not relevant. She told us what she did. She committed fornication one time. She was sorry for it. But that's not good enough. And what happens in these guidelines is imperfect men made of the dust, look at these guidelines that were given to us by men made from the dust, and they cut us loose on people. And in actuality, we get these guidelines and everybody interprets them differently. In fact, this person was disfellowshipped. Now, I tried to hold out. I held out for about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours. That poor individual was in the auditorium for almost 2 hours. Finally, they told me that, and here's what they told me. It's a matter of protecting the congregation. And I thought, my goodness, she confessed. She was crying. And again, the guidelines say tears don't necessarily mean repentance. But these men made up their mind. And when they finally said, you're going to have to make a decision, what I should have done, Lady C, and I regret that I didn't do this, I should have stood up and said, look, I can't be a part of this. I'm not going to be a hired gun for the Watchtower. Please pick somebody else. And I walked out. I would have walked out. And so it's just sad that men are put in this position. And by the way, this was very traumatic for me.
Mm-hmm.
Very traumatic.
Before you go any further, her husband did not come to the judicial meeting with you?
No, they were separated. He left her. Yeah. And later on, they got divorced.
Okay.
It was a big mess. And I don't know if that had anything to do with the fact that that he wasn't going to forgive her. But
they may think that because he didn't forgive, then maybe there was some other stuff going on. But he might have been having an affair.
Later on, he actually got his fellowship. It was sad.
He might have been doing something himself.
Yeah.
That's the reason why he wasn't giving her any affection. His affections was already someplace else.
Yeah. By the way, she moved out of town. She just it destroyed her. And I don't know where she's at now, but she's not a witness. She never came back. Not only are judicial committees a flawed system, a system that just rips families to shreds, destroys the self-image, gives people a low self-esteem, because a lot of the people that have been disfellowshipped, even when they come back, you can tell that they've really been hurt bad by the experience. In addition, it hurts elders that are good at heart. Not every elder was power hungry. I mentioned the one elder that he used to go for the jugular every time he was on a judicial committee. Not everybody is like that. But I will tell you, there are a lot of elders that have nightmares. In fact, I'm one of them. I don't just have Armageddon nightmares. I have judicial committee nightmares. So along with it being a flawed system, it's a system where the governing body puts a book together with all these guidelines and then cuts men loose. Men that are so imperfect. In fact, I actually know of several cases, and even in my case, and I'll conclude with my case, where the men that were judging were actually practicing gross sin. That happens.
Okay.
So let me share just two more cases with you real quick. When I moved to this congregation, they fast-tracked my appointment, and I was appointed right away because they needed the help. And I was approached by two brothers, and they told me that I needed to watch out for a ministerial servant. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, there was an allegation that he talked a 16-year-old into jumping into the shower with him. Now, I was in the medical field, and I said, we got to report it. And they said, no, we can't. It's her word against his. And if you say anything, you're going to be slandering. Well, what happened about 6 months later, 6 or 7 months later, he molested his stepdaughter and her friend. Now, her friend was not a witness. So we had to do some real quick damage control because they were going to the authorities, the family that was not a witness, that were not witnesses. And so they went to the authorities, and we met with him right away. But here's, again, an example of how incompetent elders can be. One of the elders decided that it would be best, and at this time we had 6 elders, that all the elders be at the Judicial Committee. Now, the guideline is very clear. 3 elders are to be on a Judicial Committee. In some cases, you may use 4. We had 6 elders when we met with this guy. And of course, he was disfellowshipped, and he went to prison because he molested a non-witness. Now, I will tell you, his wife also reported him to the authorities because they were threatening her with the removal of her kids, because at first she didn't want to go to the authorities. So what a bad situation. Now, the last case I'll share real quick, I ended up being on the receiving end. I've been on both ends of judicial committees. And I knew, because I had actually made some enemies with the elder body. There were some men that I think there was some jealousy, and there were some other issues involved. But I made a mistake, and I did it the right way. I did it Watchtower protocol, right? I went to Jehovah. I went to my wife. Of course, she wasn't going to forgive me. And I went to the elders. Now, the elders wanted to really humiliate me. In fact, I committed adultery. And I'll be straight up with you. I am who I am. I'm not going to hide who I am. So I went to them, but they wanted to really humiliate me. And one of the elders actually asked me if I went to a massage parlor. And I was like, where did this come from? Now, there are some massage parlors in the area, and I know that that's like a house of ill repute, prostitution, I guess. But it blew me away. I'm thinking, why are you asking me if I went to a massage parlor? What does this have to do with my sin? So I just told them, I said, here's the deal, guys. I'm going to walk out the door. You make a decision. I knew what the decision was going to be, because they wanted details. They wanted to humiliate me. And I was outside for about 5 minutes. And I came back in, and they said, you're disfellowshipped. Now, here's the last thing I want to mention about these men that have been entrusted with justice, with mercy, men that are supposed to be a hiding place from the wind. This is what one elder told me when I was walking out. By the way, you know that they don't pray after they mention your disfellowship. He said this. He says, you do know we are handing you over to Satan. And when he said that, I thought, I spent 49 years in an organization, and in 5 minutes they made a decision, and that brother said, well, that man said that he handed me over to Satan. And that sums it all up. Yeah. It's a flawed system, and sometimes these men can be very brutal. In conclusion, I want to say a few things. First of all, I now realize that I was nothing more than a hired gun for the Watchtower. True, when I was an elder, I loved public talks. I loved giving convention parts, circuit assembly parts, but my makeup was not one to judge people. And I want to actually apologize to the people that I affected, because what I did was judged people. In essence, I was a hired gun for the Watchtower, a corporation that pretends to be a religion. And sadly, we see people that have committed suicide, people that have just given up. And I just really want to let everybody know that I'm so glad that I'm not a part of an organization that has a flawed system.
This program was sponsored by Critical Thinkers.